Welcome to the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Glenn Forbes, in today for Stephanie Haney. Thanks so much for joining us. Today is the second day of our week-long series, IdeaStream Explores Property Taxes. Big thanks to everyone who joined us for the latest stop on the Sound of Ideas community tour at the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo last night. If you missed it, we'll bring you a condensed version of that conversation tomorrow at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. on 89.7 WKSU. Last night, we discussed efforts to reform or even eliminate Ohio's property tax system, and we heard from public schools, parks, and programs that count on that funding. Today, we'll discuss another group that relies heavily on property taxes, Ohio's 1,300 townships, which do not levy municipal income taxes. More than 35% of Ohioans live in a township. We'll hear from leaders in Portage County today about the role property taxes play in their communities and what the proposed changes could mean for their future. We'll also talk to a reporter who explored how this issue is playing out in Stark County. In studio, we have Anna Huntsman, IdeaStream's Akron-Kent reporter. We both survived a treacherous commute to the studio today. Hope
happy to be here.
Happy to be here.
Please continue listening, everyone.
Yes.
Please make that horrible commute worth it for me.
Hope everyone is staying safe out there amid the rain and traffic and lightning and all that other stuff. Joining me by video call, we have Matt Kelly, who is the Portage County Auditor. Matt, hello.
Hello there. Good morning.
And Joseph Bika, the Portage County Treasurer. Joe, good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning.
And if you'd like to get involved, join the conversation, give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can send us an email, soi@ideastream.org, or you can message us on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. All right, so Matt, let's start with you. Tell us about the Office of the County Auditor. We sometimes see, the stickers on the gas pumps and things like that. How do you fit into local government? What's your role?
Right. The auditor's office does have a lot of responsibilities, mainly the chief fiscal officer of the county. Corporations have a chief fiscal officer. The county also has a chief fiscal officer. So that's my role as county auditor. And another important thing that we do, we are the tax assessor for the county, and that's by Ohio law. So there's 88 counties in Ohio. There's 86 auditors, 2 of them at Nkaga, charter governments. So they have a little bit different way of doing it, but the other 86 counties have an auditor, such as myself. As tax assessor, we determine real price for tax purposes. I also sit on the county board of revision or delegate, and I also sit on the county budget commission as secretary. So we, as auditor, as the auditor's office, we ensure that tax revenues are properly distributed to, you mentioned townships a minute ago. We get the tax revenue out to townships, municipalities, county government, libraries, fire districts, et cetera. So we make sure all that is calculated correctly and those tax revenues are distributed correctly.
Joe, tell us about your responsibilities, how you work with the auditor. I know treasurers sometimes do, 5-year forecasts and things of that nature. So how are some of your duties different from the auditor?
So we take the calculations and the figures from the auditor's office, and we actually collect those monies from the property taxes. So we actually send out the bills, and we collect the monies in-house here at the county. My office also does all of the investing for the county. And then when the auditor's office sends us warrants to pay out to those townships or municipalities, other local government agencies, we actually pay that out. So we act as the county's bank and investment team, per se.
Okay, thank you very much. Anna Huntsman, you've been doing a lot of reporting. Pike Township in Stark County was one of your focuses. What did you hear there about the property tax? What are people saying, and what questions and concerns came up the most?
Yeah, so I'll back up for a second here. When I started looking into how abolishing or reforming property tax would affect townships, I first went to one of Stark County's largest townships, which is Plain Township. Stark County has, I think, 35 municipalities. 17 of them are townships. So there's quite a few in Stark County. I actually grew up in one, Perry Township. So I spoke to the Plain Township auditor, Lisa Campbell, just going to shout her out for a second. She gave me such great information And she was explaining that about 40% of Plain Township's budget comes from property tax. This is through levies approved by voters. And she was saying, if property tax would ever be abolished, it would affect us quite a bit. That would mean big cuts to local services. She's like, but you need to really talk to the smaller townships, because she basically said she was concerned that it could really hurt them, potentially even eliminate them, because they really rely on property tax because they're small. So that's how I got into Pike Township. And this is a small community. It's just south of Canton. It is about 3,000 residents. And I spoke with one of the trustees, Doug Baum, and he basically said, his exact quote from my reporting is, it would next to shut us down if property tax was eliminated, because it funds their essential services. I mean, they're responsible for, 37 miles of roads, kind of unique to Pike Township. They maintain 11 cemeteries. So that's one of they have to attend to these cemeteries. So all of that is funded through property tax. So for them, it would really significantly change how they would have to maintain the township. So that's kind of where I went. He said, we'll carry on, the next day will come, but it would really significantly impact them.
So elected officials obviously concerned about enough money to provide these services and things like that. I would assume the residents had some of the same concerns. Did you hear anything different from the residents about the impact, potential impact?
I asked him, as a trustee, he hears from the residents all the time, whether it's, again, in a small township, one of the, things that they say is great about a township is it's one of the most efficient forms of government, because if you have an issue, you can kind of call up your trustee and get it fixed pretty quickly, or just go down to Township Hall. And he was saying he hadn't really heard too much about it from residents at this point, but that I did speak to one resident of Canton Township, which is a neighboring township there, and he basically, the sense I get is everybody kind of likes how things are going. These are the things that are kind of behind closed doors. As journalists, we kind of we really look into this, and so we see it going on. But for everyone else, it's kind of just, my road gets the chip and seal, my road gets paved when I need it. If I have an emergency, the EMS gets there. That's how people are seeing it. So they may not realize right off the bat how property tax is actually funding just their way of life day to day.
Matt, we hear so much about home values. How are they assessed? How often does that process happen? And obviously people get the bill in the mail. Take us through that process.
Yeah, so every 6 years by Ohio law, my office is required to go out and actually put eyes on the parcels here in Portage County. And based on that assessment, we do a true value of that house, market value of that house or that parcel. And every 3 years, we actually do what's kind of a data analysis of the properties or parcels around Portage County. Once that information comes back, we do calculations. That information goes down to Columbus, comes back to us, and then those tax bills are sent out through Joe's office. Just backing up a little bit, I'm a resident of Suffield Township, and everything she was saying a minute ago is true. Our township, typically, what I've seen is township fiscal officers are very, very good at what they do as far as budgeting, where that money needs to go to serve their residents. I've seen it in my township, Suffield, where I live, in Portage County, and they're very good at budgeting and taking care of the money that comes to them. If property taxes go away, that was a true statement a minute ago that would decimate, if not eliminate, most townships around at least our county, and I would assume around the state.
So Matt, commercial and industrial buildings, are they appraised and taxed differently than residential homes?
Sometimes they are. If there's a tax incentive, such as a Turk or a TIF or something like that, those are basically programs that incentivize businesses to come to a certain location. So they may be exempted from taxes going forward for a certain amount of time. Could be 5, 10, 20 years, whatever that may be. So yeah, it is a little bit different. Of course, those are different, different structures, different land use sometimes, and also agricultural property is taxed a little bit. I don't say taxed differently, but there's also exemptions for agricultural property too. So it gets to be very, very complicated. The way we do property taxes in Ohio is very complicated. So it is very good, like programs like this, getting the word out to educate people on how it works, because abolishing property taxes sounds really good if you just stop there. But as the reporter said a minute ago, if you start looking into what those property taxes go into, you start to realize that they are very, very important for the things that we need in our townships, in our county, our municipalities, et cetera. So, yeah, it's very important. We definitely need reform, that's for sure. But abolishing property taxes, my opinion, that's just not the way to go right now.
That's Matt Kelly. He's the Portage County Auditor. Joseph Bika is with us as well, the Portage County Treasurer. If you'd like to get in on the conversation, give us a call, 866-578-0903. You can send us an email, soi@ideastream.org. Again, the phone number, 866-578-0903. We're also joined by IdeaStream reporter Anna Huntsman.
Yeah, and I was just curious. I wanted to jump in here, Matt, if not to put you on the spot, but as a township resident and also a government official, I was just curious, do you hear this kind of the same sentiment from residents as that I heard, as far as not really knowing too much about property taxes, or do people have like strong opinions up where you are in Portage County? I didn't know if you could speak to what you're hearing up in your community.
No, I think, yeah, you're exactly correct. At first, it starts out with that strong opinion. And then once we have the conversation about what property taxes are all about and where they go to, I think the light comes on in most people's mind that, okay, this isn't such a bad thing, but we definitely need to reform it. I can tell you from our standpoint, Joe and I here in Portage County work hand in hand educating our citizens as to, things that, ideas, who to contact about your, I don't want to say complaints, but who to contact about how to reform property taxes, which obviously is our state representatives. But from our standpoint, the auditor's office has had our office out on the street in Portage County at several different events over the years. We've been to the Ravenna Balloon Affair. That's a big event here in Portage County. We've been to the Portage County Fair. When I say we've had our office out there, we've actually been out there accessible. I've been out there. My staff's been out there with a laptop. Anything that the auditor's office can do here at the main building, we can do out there at the office. But more importantly, we're there to answer questions. When our tax bills came out here a few years ago in 24, when we had our sexennial assessment, there were a lot of people lined up at our booth to ask questions about the tax bills, and we were there to take those hard questions, have those tough conversations. But almost every single time, people walked away with a good feeling that now they understand the system and now they know what to do about it. And I really honestly think that's a lot of where the reform that recently happened, the legislation that passed last November, this March, I really believe our representative, they had to do something because of events like that and interaction that we had with our residents, certainly here in Portage County like that.
And Joseph Bika is the Portage County Treasurer. Joe, how much of Portage County's township's operating budget comes from property taxes? And we talked about, distributing that revenue out. Specifically, where does it go, if you could give us percentages?
So in Portage County, it's a bit different than in Stark. I think that our townships rely on property tax a bit more. Our blend is about 60 or 70% property tax, and 30% comes from other revenue sources, such as local government funds, gas tax, other things like that. So the townships are much more reliant, and they're much tighter from a fiscal standpoint here in Portage County. So they're looking at any creative ways to reduce their expenses, work with other townships, work within the county to try and be more fiscally sound. But things are quite a bit tighter here from the percentage wise.
That's what I heard in Pike Township. Trustee Doug Baum told me we're already tight as it is with the levies that we do have. Yeah. So we're being as conservative fiscally as we can be. So eliminating or severely cutting property tax would hit them hard. They said about a little more than 60% in Pike Township, their budget comes directly from property tax.
If you'd like to get in on the conversation, you can give it. I'm sorry, sorry about that. Real quick, was that Matt or Joe?
That was Joe. I live in Ritztown Township, and residents do talk to me a lot about the property tax issue and how high the property taxes are. And again, I kind of understand where Matt's coming from. The once you explain to people what services are provided through that property tax, there's a whole new light on things. And to try and explain to people where you would have to backfill those funds is significant. It has to come from somewhere, right? We all want public safety. We all want plowed roads. We all want cemeteries that are taken care of. So where does that funding come from if it doesn't come from property tax or some other source?
All right, I definitely want to get to some phone calls here. If you've got a question for the Portage County Auditor, Matt Kelly, or the Portage County Treasurer, Joseph Pica, or our Summit and Stark County reporter, Anna Huntsman here at IdeaStream, give us a call, 866-578-0903. That's 866-578-0903. We have Jeff in North Royalton. You're on the Sound of Ideas.
Good morning. I grew up in rural southeastern Ohio in a township, Warren Township. And the politics are 180 out from what we're used to here in Cuyahoga County or any larger, metropolitan area. We knew every township trustee. They were our neighbors. They were our teachers. One was my Boy Scout leader. And we all knew way in advance what the money was for, where it was going to come from. And, we had to pay for our school system, Warren Local School District, and we had to pay for our own volunteer fire department. We also had to pay for all the township roads that ran through the township. We had two major roads. We had Ohio Route 7 and we had Route 550A. Those were state roads, and they took care of those, but probably 80% of the roads in the township were paid for by us. And it's the most intimate kind of government I can think of. And if you get rid of property taxes, all that collapses.
All right, Jeff, thanks so much for the call and your thoughts there. That's kind of been the theme, and that's what we've been hearing at townships. It is certainly different, but there's a lot to maintain, and it's a little more, tight-knit in some ways, maybe.
Yeah, and this kind of goes along with what he was saying, but it's something I wanted to mention earlier too. Some of the leaders I spoke to kind of felt that perhaps some of the frustration is trickling into this conversation from the frustration overall with how state money is being spent or how federal dollars are being spent, and kind of this conversation about, nationally, there's conversations about waste and fraud and why are my dollars being spent on X program that I don't care about? Why aren't they being spent on something different? The prices are going up constantly. It's getting harder and harder to afford to live, throughout the country. And so some of the township leaders are saying, we feel like this frustration with that overall is trickling into the ballot box locally with the conversation about property tax. Whereas with property tax in townships, it's kind of, they're saying it's ensuring local control. So when you go to the ballot box in your township and you're voting on a road levy or you're voting on a fire or safety services levy, you are entirely in control. You're saying, yes, I want this money to be, I want my tax dollars to go to the fire department, EMS,
right,
et cetera. Or if not, the levy fails. So they're saying this is local control at its finest with levies in townships and things like that. And so perhaps this frustration about federal and state funding is kind of trickling into that. And so that might be where some of the, miscommunication is coming from, or the misunderstanding, perhaps. I just wanted to throw that out there because that's something I heard in my reporting.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get into, concerns of the homeowners, which, of course, there are plenty. And I throw this to Matt and Joseph in Portage County. Jackie from Broadview Heights says that when property taxes go up 30%, so does house insurance. May not be a perfect equation there, but house insurance go up. She says homeowners are doubly taxed. We've seen property values go up. Of course, in some ways, that's a good thing. You have more value to your home, but then twice a year or in your mortgage or however you pay it, you're certainly paying more in property taxes. So it's a double-edged sword, guys, for homeowners, and you can certainly understand their concern, especially if their home is paid off, but they still have to pay the government X amount of dollars every year.
Yeah, I agree. That's where the reform needs to happen. Now, there was legislation passed last year, took effect in March of this year, that somewhat helps with that. I don't think we're completely where we need to be yet, but yeah, that is a true statement. One of the first pieces of education that we had to get out there was, Portage County saw on average a 31.8% increase in property values around the county back in 24. And a lot of people hear that figure and think, well, my taxes are then going to go up 30%. And that's not necessarily the case. It's not a dollar for dollar increase. I would say a rough estimate would be about half. People's taxes went up about 14 to 16%. That's still a ton of money. But the education comes from, hey, your property, which is most people's biggest investment, just went up 31, 32%, which is great if you just leave it at that. But then you go over to the tax piece that's associated with that, and now your property value going up also leads to an increase in property taxes. So yes, we did some reform here late last year. It took effect earlier this year, but there's definitely opportunity to help with that. Some ideas I have. We have what's called the homestead exemption. It's for those that are 65 or older. There's an income requirement that my opinion, I don't think there should be an income requirement on that. But they should just do away with that and include all those over 65. And also it applies to disabled military veterans. Only if they're 100% disabled do they qualify for that. Well, they should take and maybe if you're 90% disabled, you're eligible for 90% of the benefit. If you're 80%, and so on and so forth. So those are some ideas that I've passed on to our legislators. I can tell you that our legislators here in Portage County do listen to us. There are two of X amount of people down in Columbus, so they do listen to us. But at the end of the day, more reform is needed. So we're not taxing people out of their houses. We need the services, but we have to do it responsibly and make sure that people can afford the services and also afford to live in their houses.
Wanted to stay on property taxes real quick before we go back to the phone lines. An email from David, who lives in Shalersville Township, which is in Portage County. A potential delay with the second half tax bill, the second half property tax bill. He says his daughter in Summit County received her bill due July 31st. I know it's a little later in Cuyahoga County this year, I believe August 13th. David said he called and told there was an issue due to something at the state level. Was there some sort of delay in getting those property tax bills out to the residents this year?
So when the changes in the Ohio law took place to do some property tax reform, the calculations changed for the auditor, and then more importantly, the calculations had to change within the software platforms that both the auditor and the treasurer use to generate those values and finally generate the bills. And what happened was each county in Ohio uses different software packages, and the implementation of the calculation and the software changes made significant delays around the state. So as you look around the state, every county has issued tax bills at a different time. We're coming up on 2 months late on getting the tax bills out because of these some changes that are still not completed. So the treasurer's office actually sent out mobile home tax bills yesterday, and we're hoping that the software will be completed this week and we'll be able to get those bills out. But yes, it is delayed based on software implementation.
Okay, thank you very much. You get a little extra time, not the worst thing in the world. Maybe plan a little more, get another paycheck or two. You can join the conversation at 866-578-0903. Jonathan in Sharon Center, I believe you know our guest. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Hi, my name is John Harris. For Matt and Joe, I'm your friendly neighborhood library director. I just wanted to make a quick note that as one of the organizations that does have a property tax levy on the books, any kind of outside millage, so the stuff that voters actually vote on, is capped at the level when it gets passed. The other thing I was hoping that our guest could speak on is the difference in stability between different types of tax revenue. So I know for our budget that our property tax revenue is pretty stable. Provided that it doesn't completely go away with an amendment. But things like the local government fund is a mix of sales and income tax and depends from month to month on what the state takes in. And other things are up to the whim of the legislature and the biennium budget. So I was just hoping that they could speak to the difference in stability between different tax sources.
All right, Jonathan, thanks so much. Matt and Joseph, your thoughts there on the differences in stability in voted versus unvoted?
Yeah, so unvoted or inside millage, that's Ohio law. So that's set by law, and we're required to distribute that as it's set by law. The outside millage, or what we vote on, otherwise known as levies, I guess when you talk about the stability question, it just depends on, if the voters in that particular taxing area want to vote for that levy. So my opinion on Portage County in particular is we have a relatively stable revenue coming in. Of course, like the caller just said, that depends on, if they abolish property taxes altogether, then that's going to be thrown into chaos. But when you talk about libraries and when a library has a levy on, most of the time I see that pass. So I think people value the libraries in their particular communities. When a fire levy's on, they do a very good job of advertising that, and it generally passes. I can tell you on our website, the Portage County Auditor website, we have an option that you can choose. It's called Tax Estimator, and you can go all the way down to your individual property. You put your address in, and it will tell you what your tax bill, how it's going to change if those levies that are on the current ballot pass. It'll tell you what your tax liability is going to be for the following year, because we always pay our tax. We're in 26 right now, so we're paying property taxes for 25. But that's just one way we try and be transparent with the stability of our revenue and what you're looking at as a citizen that you're going to pay and what you're paying it towards.
All right, so certainly check that out. We're going to keep the conversation going all week here on The Sound of Ideas, and of course on Morning Edition. And all things considered, you'll hear a lot more of our reporting on property taxes. If you do have any questions, you live in Portage County, certainly reach out to Matt Kelly, who's the Portage County Auditor, and Joseph Bika, the Portage County Treasurer. Thanks so much for joining us here on The Sound of Ideas. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And Anna Huntsman, IdeaStream's Akron-Canton reporter, thanks so much for your time today, and we'll hear more from you this week, certainly.
Yeah, you can check out my story that aired yesterday on Today from the Ohio Newsroom, all about Pike Township if you're interested in learning more. So thanks for having me.
And ideastream.org, you can check it out. Thanks so much. We certainly appreciate it. We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, a conversation about how nature helped a local author through a period of depression and some of life's toughest battles. This is The Sound of Ideas. I'm Glenn Forbes, in today for Stephanie Haney, and we'll be right back. It's The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Glenn Forbes, in today for Stephanie Haney. Thanks so much for staying with us. It's estimated that almost 20% of the adult population in the U.S. deal with some form of depression. That's around 50 million people. And depression can take many forms, from losing interest in daily activities, pulling away from friends and family, to thoughts of suicide. Addressing depression also widely varies, from simply changing diet or sleep habits to therapy with a professional or the use of medications. Jared Anderson is an Ohio-based writer and a poet whose book, Something in the Woods Loves You, chronicles his own experiences with depression and how his first step to getting help was taking a walk in the woods. IdeaStream's Drew Mazius spoke with Anderson ahead of his appearance at the Nature Center at Shaker Lakes on Wednesday evening. The segment is on tape, so we cannot take your calls. You can still send us your thoughts, soi@ideastream.org. And a warning, this conversation includes discussions about suicide.
Jared Anderson, welcome to The Sound of Ideas.
Thanks, Drew. So good to be with you.
Now, the book Something in the Woods Loves You deals with some pretty heavy subject matter and, mental health challenges, suicidal ideation. I'm just curious, as we open this conversation, how are you feeling now that the book's been out for a minute?
Doing all right. It's, as I talk about in the book, I've come to think about my own struggles with mental health as a natural process akin to seasons. And sometimes I enjoy thinking of it as brain weather is a metaphor I often come back to. So there are good days and bad, but today's a good day.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. And we'll get into my own mental health challenges as well. So I'm glad we'll be able to chat about this book. And each chapter of the book, talking about the structure, is titled for a specific plant or animal. Everything from white-tailed deer to forsythia, lightning bugs, and crows, white trillium. And the chapter relates to your own struggles. How did you come to design the book that way?
Well, when my editor first pitched the idea of doing a longer nonfiction book to me, I loved the idea, and I had a lot to say about nature and its impact on my own struggles with depression. But the terrifying thing was thinking of how huge the topic was. So, on its surface, yes, I wanted to write a book about nature and mental health, but those are so broad and ambiguous. It eventually struck me that the key would be to set my own limitations, that finding that structure that resonated with the story I had to tell was the first step that would make the rest of it possible. So I realized that in terms of my interactions with nature, I felt like I had very personal relationships with very specific organisms. And that became my way in to tell the stories and find the metaphors that would really help me talk about what I wanted to talk about.
And let's talk about that first step you took to go outside for a walk. And this was at the behest of and a suggestion of your partner, Leslie. What set you on this path? Talk about taking that first step and, in a way, how difficult that first step is when someone is facing a mental health challenge or crisis.
Yeah, well, I say in the book that depression is a liar. And that was something I came back to again and again. Because most other folks I have known that have struggled with depression have gone through the phase of other people have depression, but not me. What I have are legitimate reasons for sadness. So I struggled with a bit of that denial. And then even when I realized that I had a problem, I had just stepped away from a director job at Ohio University and wanted to work on my mental health, but I wasn't sure how. And in the depths of depression, even from the outside, seemingly small barriers can seem insurmountable. And so the first step for me was just this idea of how to be friends with the world again, how to recognize that contentment was possible. And I found myself going back to childhood enthusiasms, which isn't a mystery in my case. It's nature. It's always been nature. But I had this feeling that, yeah, but that's ridiculous. That's kid stuff. That the nature I loved, the nature I connected with was somehow locked in a glass case of childhood and that I couldn't access it. But we have a lovely park system here in Delaware County, Ohio, and there was a parking lot and a sign and a nature center. And all of them were welcoming, and I could only drive by them so many times and maintain that feeling that I couldn't return to nature. So, eventually I found myself in the parking lot. Yes, my partner, Leslie, encouraged me to go for walks. And I took the first step, which was literally a first step, in a nature area called Shale Hollow. And I took a walk. And when I did, I felt a knot untie in my chest, that being out under the trees, there wasn't a bunch of external pressure to perform as an employee or a friend or a husband. And I walked to this little winding creek and I saw a blue heron wading. And I just had this moment where I felt tears on my cheeks. And I just thought, oh, it's all still here. That nature hadn't gone anywhere. It was me. That I went away, that I stopped noticing. And, it didn't solve my mental health issues, but it gave me a glimmer of hope that there were things worth pursuing and there were reasons to untangle my thoughts and still engage with the world.
Yeah. And jumping ahead a little bit, you write about how this is in combination with other things. You see a mental health professional, you get on medication, but can you talk about how you still experience that kind of that relief, that reflection in nature now, even with these other facets of addressing your mental health challenges? Do you still get that joy? Do you still have that sigh of relief when you go out in the woods and take a walk around or observe a native animal?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. And I think my particular brand of depression often has a lot to do with my inner critic that is always prompting me that I should be doing more. or I should be succeeding in a certain way, or contributing to my family in a certain way. And there's something about just being out in nature and having close observation that really shuts down that voice for me. It's hard to argue with myself that I'm failing at taking a hike or a walk among the trees or sitting at the base of a maple just to see what happens. And no matter how cunning my inner critic can be on a certain day, I always just have a kind of innate instinct that what I'm doing when I'm out in nature is time well spent. And yeah, it really quiets my inner landscape. And I don't struggle as much with these big abstract thoughts of shame that depression will bring to me, or hopelessness, because it isn't abstract when I'm out in the woods. You know, I don't have an interaction with the concept of a gray squirrel. I'm looking at that one.
Yeah.
And it's being silly in this specific way. And you know, there's no argument to be made that any of that was manufactured to sell me something, or to sell me a political position or a product. Or it's as fundamental as we have. And boy, that resonates me in a way that is medicine.
Well, in terms of things that resonate, you come back to shame, and I'm glad you brought up that word. You bring up shame oftentimes in the book. Can you talk about how that manifested in your life? Because a lot of people that deal with mental health challenges are ashamed to talk about them, very flatly. So how did that manifest in your life, and how did you overcome that shame, that feeling of being ashamed to even bring up the kind of turmoil that was happening in your own mind?
Yeah, I mean, I was an 80s kid in a small town, semi-rural Ohio, and the signal was clear that we did not talk about mental health struggles. Most of us men did not talk about emotions generally. So even in my youth, I remember just going and climbing a tree, and I didn't have the words to articulate it, but that was where I could feel okay. And maybe even feel fully expressed, even though I was often on my own out in the woods. And that feeling of shame, that since I couldn't even talk about depression, I couldn't take any first steps to seek help because I would have to admit it. Hard to get past that in terms of talking to professionals, but I reached just this real low point where, in theory, my career was going well, my relationships were going well, and I was just miserable all the time. And there was this betrayal of reality I felt, almost, that I had checked all these boxes that I thought might potentially fix it. And of course, it didn't fix it because the call was coming from inside the house. And admitting that was a huge first step, and just talking about it with a supportive group of friends and my wife, that really helped me open the door. But I was still terrified to go talk to my family doctor. Was the first step I took. And she really helped me in terms of being like, yeah, this is not uncommon. And what we know is particularly helpful is a combination of medication and therapy, which I eventually pursued. But yeah, I don't know what I thought was going to happen if I revealed this vulnerability.
Yeah.
But of course I took that risk, and revealing the vulnerability is the only way to be earnest and authentic, and the only way anybody can help. So yeah, that was a very scary step, and I'm glad I managed it.
Yeah, I'm glad you did too. If you're just joining us on The Sound of Ideas, I'm speaking with Jared Anderson. He's the author of Something in the Woods Loves You. He's coming to Northeast Ohio later this week. I'm really glad you talked about opening up. As I alluded to earlier, my story sounds very similar to yours. I'm physically active. I'm a middle-class individual. I have a good job. I have a good partner. But something felt empty, and I eventually got screened for anxiety and depression, got on medication, started seeing a therapist, and it was a tough first step step, but it was very necessary. And it makes me want to ask about this phrase that you use over and over again in the book, and it's depression defends itself. And I think it just alludes to the fact that, you know, you can tell yourself, or your depression, the crisis that you're going through, however you classify it, is willing to tell you anything to continue to be that inner critic that you also mentioned earlier. Can you talk about that phrase, depression defends itself, and why you kept coming back to that in the book?
Yeah, it's really depression's main weapon, at least in terms of my internal landscape. And it's this feeling that no matter how miserable I am, I don't deserve help because this version of me is somehow broken in a fundamental way. And so I might have wished that I was the sort of person who deserved help, but that person wasn't here. That person was hypothetical. And as somebody who loves and writes poetry, it was really kind of a metaphor that helped me get past that particular version of how my depression defended itself. And it was that idea of brain weather that I mentioned briefly earlier. Mm-hmm. This idea that my internal struggles, my internal landscape was an echo or a mirror of the landscapes that I loved, of the nature I loved. And that answered shame in this way, if I can quickly lay out the metaphor.
Sure.
You know, if I planned a picnic and it was canceled by a thunderstorm, I might be disappointed, but I wouldn't be ashamed. Okay, well, why? We know that I didn't invite the thunderstorm. I don't steer the clouds. It's a natural, well-known phenomenon that nobody invites. Okay, well, that's exactly the same as mental illness, the same as depression. I didn't invite depression. It's not a consequence of an action. It doesn't hold any malice toward me. It's a natural, known, disappointing phenomenon. It's weather. It's brain weather. And when I landed upon that metaphor and the idea that my brain is as natural as a river valley and it can have its own storms, that really took the fangs away from shame in a way that let me think of it as a malady that then deserves attention from experts, from doctors, and from myself, frankly.
I want to ask you about the language you use around suicide, a really serious topic that you come back to again and again, because I find it interesting. For example, you write, "When I think kindly of death, I think of this. I think of rejoining a world that needs neither human words nor permission to be fully embodied in its own existence." Can you talk about your view of death during your most oppressive episodes and how it wasn't necessarily, I don't know, the most morbid sense of dying, but how, you know, the world will keep going without us. And I don't mean to make light of that, but I did find it to be a very interesting view of death throughout the book.
Yeah, I was a weird kid who has always been shocking.
Same.
Who's always been kind of preoccupied with the idea of death. My parents laugh that they had a parent-teacher conference with my 5th grade teacher, and she had a piece of paper I had written on where I talked about the shackles of existence, and I was 10. Yeah, bless her heart, that teacher. But that preoccupation, which probably goes parallel with my lifelong struggles with depression, you know, I've been pondering death for a long time, and it goes back to that feeling, parsing that feeling I have in nature of sort of wholeness and peace. And, you know, death itself is frightening in terms of an ending of self, but I have this sense that everything I love in the world isn't dependent on me to keep it moving. And I think that's what I mean by the wholeness of nature that I'm part of that wholeness and part of that tradition. And I often have this feeling that wholeness holds what I am in trust in a way that is immutable. So that takes some of the fear away from death. And in the worst parts of depression, the idea of just inner quiet can feel like a friend.
Mm-hmm.
I had a therapist named Mark who at one point pointed out to me that suicidal ideation itself, there was a kind of strange hopefulness in it because it suggested a kind of agency, a kind of taking ownership of an ability to change your situation. And that, that didn't have to be death. That didn't have to be a negation of all possible futures, that there are other ways to take control, agency of our own lives and make changes. So yeah, I often think about death, and those thoughts come to me sometimes just walking down a path beneath the trees, because I'm thinking of cycles of change, especially with seasons here in Ohio. As the autumn comes on and dormancy begins, Halloween shows start.
Yeah.
It's hard for me not to start pondering such things.
Yeah, it almost takes the power. We all experience it. It almost takes the power away from death a little bit. Obviously, in the book, you navigate your own mental health challenges, but another aspect of your writing is that you are facing a society which, in your view, in some ways, doesn't care for its own citizens in the way that it should. You write about the pitfalls of our healthcare system, of people going bankrupt, the ruthlessness of capitalism, even men and women not being encouraged, to talk about their own struggles with mental health. Through writing this book, do you feel any better equipped to go through society, to kind of encounter these pitfalls of society, as I mentioned?
I think hanging a lantern on it always helps.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a really positive outpouring from folks who have sent me emails to talk about their own stories and their own struggles with finding help, finding support, affording it. And I know from my own story how terrifying it was. It's hard to take a first step in finding help for your mental health when you have no idea what it will cost or if you can afford it or what it's like. One reason I wanted to write the book was just to talk to my past self and try to dispel some of the mystery I felt around what it might look like to seek help. And one huge thing for me was this idea that finding a counselor is a little bit like dating, and that you have to find one that you mesh with, that feeling like your counselor, your therapist is an ally who gets you has been studied, and it's such a huge part of what determines a positive outcome, which is also the last thing you want to do when you really want a counselor. But yeah, I do think it is helpful. It's been helpful to me just to articulate it so that you don't feel, a little bit nuts in terms of how difficult it is. But I don't have an answer for it, but it's constantly a source of friction for me. I was thinking the other day that we have fire departments all over the country. But suicide, mental health claims so many more lives than fires. Why don't we have public funded mental health departments, that have quick teams to come and help? Why isn't that aspect of education in every school? It really feels like the stigma is steering policy in a way that doesn't mesh with the data, with the fact of the threat on the ground.
Yeah. And in many ways, it's something I feel like we want to sweep under the rug and not talk about at all. But before we close, I do want to ask you about, you mentioned that other people come up and talk to you, they contact you, they write to you, and, I'm sure share their stories, ask you about how you're doing. You're not a mental health professional. You have certainly a lot of firsthand experience, but how do you respond to those people? How do you direct them? How do you maybe get involved in a person's life while also still protecting your own personal mental health?
Yeah, I mean, enthusiasm for seeking support from experts is often how I do it. I mean, someone called the book a me too, not a how to, and I really appreciated that. But I had been writing poetry about nature and mental health before this book, and so I've been getting these kinds of messages for a long time. And in a real way, that's what the book was. It was. I would have all of these conversations on social media, and I would say to Leslie, my partner, that, you know, these are long talks that I would like to have with these folks. It's hard to do over Instagram. And it became very clear that it needed to be a book, that the book was the long talk, was the hiking trip, just so that I could talk shop, just so that I could compare notes with other people who have been living under the silence of the stigma of depression. And yeah, it was a little scary not being an expert, but I still felt that there was value in just sharing and just willfully breaking the silence to talk about what I've been through and what I've learned through that process.
Well, Jared Anderson is the author of Something in the Woods Loves You, and he'll be speaking at the Nature Center at Shaker Lakes this Wednesday at 6 p.m. Jared, thanks so much for talking to us today on The Sound of Ideas.
Thanks, Drew.
And that was IdeaStream's Drew Mazias in conversation with Jared Anderson, who will be speaking at the Nature Center at Shaker Lakes Wednesday night at 6 p.m. The event is free. We'll have a link to it on today's show page. If you are in need of mental health support, the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline number to call or text is 988. That's all for today. If you missed any part of today's show, you can hear a rebroadcast tonight at 9 on 89.7 WKSU. You can also find every episode of The Sound of Ideas wherever you get your podcasts and on the IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page. Tomorrow, we'll bring you the latest Sound of Ideas community tour stop at the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo. I'm Glenn Forbes. Stephanie Haney will be back tomorrow. Thanks for keeping the conversation going, and stay safe.